Summer of 1944. The vast plains of Kansas shimmered under a sun so intense it drained the sky to a pallid hue. The air thrummed with heat, cicadas droning their incessant melody, and the coils of barbed wire encircling the detention facility gleamed like a collar of sharp points. Dust billowed from the troop transport vehicles as they rumbled to a stop. Brakes emitted a wheezing sound, the metallic tang of engine lubricant mingling with the dry, sweet perfume of wheat fields that lay just beyond the perimeter. The entire vista felt simultaneously boundless and confined. From the rear of one transport, a group of German women disembarked, their attire faded, their bearing rigid, their gazes darting with apprehension, as if malice might emerge from behind every sentinel. Liesl Hartmann was the first to touch solid ground, her boots sinking slightly into the parched earth. At 19 years of age, she carried herself with the brittle resilience of someone significantly older. Formerly an assistant nurse for the German Red Cross, she still maintained the posture of disciplined bearing. Her chin was held high, her expression keen, a braid tightly wound at the nape of her neck, as though order alone could shield her. She braced for the worst, perhaps jeers, perhaps even the glint of a rifle, but rather across the way. She murmured to Anna Vogel, who followed closely, "Remember, never let them witness your fear." Anna adjusted her round spectacles and offered the slightest inclination of her head. At 26 years of age, she had been an educator before the war irrevocably altered her existence. She clutched a satchel containing her sole treasured possession, a small diary, its pages already half filled with flowing, meticulous script, where Liesl projected an air of defiance. Anna conveyed a more subdued fortitude, an inclination to observe, to document, to persevere by noting every minute detail. She surveyed the fences, the watchtowers, the sun-bleached American banner flapping overhead, and mused, "So, this is confinement." From the dim recesses of a guard post, Captain James Whittaker observed the newly arrived women. His uniform clung damply to his shoulders in the oppressive heat, but his countenance remained composed, measured. Whittaker was a man shaped by leadership. In his early 40s, his eyes bore the etched lines of both alertness and exhaustion. He had seen combat in France during the prior conflict and carried its spectral memories silently. He deemed discipline essential, but he often stated that cruelty was a blunt instrument, incapable of forging anything other than animosity. His superiors had cautioned him, "Treat the adversary with deference, lest the Geneva Convention retaliate when American youths are taken captive abroad." Nevertheless, his motivations ran deeper. He believed compassion could possess greater potency than steel. The sentries fell into formation, rifles slung, boots resounding as they herded the women towards the intake area. Among them was Private Robert Bobby Malone, barely 20 years of age, his nose dusted with freckles, his Texan accent thick as molasses when he spoke. The war had plucked him from a cotton plantation and assigned him this peculiar duty, guarding German women who, to his surprise, bore little resemblance to the girls back home. His gaze lingered a moment too long on Liesl, who turned her head sharply, her jaw set, as if his very glance constituted an affront. The women's steps faltered upon witnessing the mess hall doors flung open wide, and from within wafted an aroma that arrested them, the scent of yeast, coffee, something rich and comforting that no prison should offer. A soldier emerged carrying a tray laden with bowls, steam rising, and astonishingly, a bottle of Coca-Cola, its dark effervescence catching the sunlight. Bobby beamed as he placed a cone atop the railing. A dollop of improvised ice cream concocted from condensed milk and Coca-Cola syrup. "Ladies!" he called out, the word delivered with a blend of jest and deference. Liesl froze. Her heart pounded against her ribs. Ice cream. She had anticipated shackles, mockery, the gnawing ache of hunger. She hissed at Anna in German, a stratagem. "They aim to subdue us before they strike." But Anna's eyes softened. She inhaled the sweet, sugary fragrance drifting across the courtyard and whispered back, "Even a ploy can possess a genuine taste." One by one, they were offered sustenance. A spoon was pressed into a calloused palm, a bowl filled with beans and cornbread. A small measure of that peculiar effervescent ice cream. The women hesitated, exchanging glances as if awaiting a signal. Whittaker granted it with a curt nod. "Eat," he said plainly. The initial mouthful was almost unbearable. Liesl clenched her jaw, resisting at first, then finally permitting the spoon to touch her lips. A cold sweetness flooded her palate. alien, sparkling, a flavor intrinsically linked to the enemy's plenty. Tears pricked her eyes, not from elation, but from mortification. How dare benevolence undo me more swiftly than malice could? She averted her face, unwilling to be observed. Anna, meanwhile, proceeded deliberately, forming thoughts within her mind. I envisioned captivity tasting of iron and cinders. Instead, it possesses the flavor of sugar and fizz. She filed the recollection away for the subsequent entry in her journal. The guards anticipated laughter, protests, perhaps defiance. Instead, a quietude descended upon the women as they ate, punctuated only by the drone of cicadas and the occasional nervous clink of spoon against metal. The atmosphere felt delicate, as though any sharp utterance might shatter it. Then, from the far end of the bench, a young German auxiliary emitted a startled laugh, taken aback by the icy shock of the ice cream against her teeth. Bobby grunted in response, muttering, "Well, I suppose prison isn't too bad, huh?" The tension fractured, just a tad. Some of the women smiled involuntarily, though they quickly suppressed it. When the meal concluded, Whitaker stepped forward. His voice carried the gravity of command, but devoid of malevolence. "You will be treated in accordance with the regulations here. You will labor, you will adhere to directives, you will maintain discipline, you will eat, you will rest. Nothing more, nothing less." He paused, meeting their gazes, allowing the assurance of fairness to permeate. Then, with a tone bordering on weariness, he added, "You are prisoners of war, but you are also women. Bear both realities in mind." That evening, within the wooden barracks furnished with narrow bunks, Lysel remained awake, her gaze fixed on the overhead beams. She heard the steady respiration of the others, the soft shuffle of boots outside as sentries changed posts. The sweetness lingered on her tongue, acrid with a sense of betrayal. She pressed her palms to her face and whispered, "This will not endure." Nothing of this nature ever lasts. Anna, a few bunks away, opened her journal beneath the faint illumination of a contraband candle. Her pencil scratched softly as she penned, "Today, I anticipated animosity. Instead, I was presented with ice cream. Perhaps America intends to deceive us, but if so, I shall gladly be misled. The fences are formidable, yet for a fleeting moment, they signified nothing at all." She closed the book with a sigh, holding it against her chest. Across the compound, Whitaker sat at his desk, loosening his collar, pouring himself a measure of bourbon. Reports from Europe cluttered his workspace, accounts of lost battles, devastated towns, the relentless progression of war. He reflected on the women's expressions when they tasted the ice cream. He considered his own daughter, 6 years old, who had once inquired if the enemy ladies wept in their slumber. He had responded affirmatively, explaining that was precisely why they merited gentle treatment. Now he pondered if he had been addressing himself more than her. Bobby, meanwhile, leaned against the exterior wall of the barracks, humming a familiar tune from home. He tapped the butt of his rifle against the ground, still smiling at the recollection of the women's surprised countenances. "German or not," he murmured, "a smile is a smile." He failed to notice Lysel's silhouette at the window slit, observing him with eyes brimming with queries she refused to articulate. The night deepened, stars blazing with hard brilliance above the plains. The fences loomed, shimmering silver in the moonlight, holding both factions in a precarious equipoise. Within those confines, benevolence and suspicion had encountered each other for the first time, circling one another like exhausted dancers. Lysel finally closed her eyes. Her heart was caught between apprehension and yearning. For the first time since her capture, she perceived the faintest tremor of something unfamiliar, something perilously close to optimism. Yet, even as it stirred, she tightened her fists more firmly beneath her blanket. Because hope, she understood, could constitute the most insidious ploy of all. And somewhere beyond those luminous barriers, the conflict continued to rage, poised to rend compassion asunder. The morning bell reverberated against the still air, a flat metallic cry that roused both sentries and captives into weary motion. Within the barracks, the German women stirred from thin mattresses, their breath misting faintly in the early chill before the sun had fully ascended. The aroma of hay, soap, and humanity hung close, mingling with the faint sweetness of cornbread drifting from the mess hall across the yard. Life behind the wire had begun to establish a cadence, though rhythm did little to alleviate the ache of confinement. Anna Vogel adjusted her spectacles and folded her blanket with meticulous precision, each corner aligned as if discipline could provide an anchor. She opened her journal, inscribing a brief notation before the call to labor. The fences hum with their own distinct music, louder than the cicadas. Each morning, they serve as a reminder that the world exists just beyond our reach. She closed the book, concealing it within her satchel. Her writing transcended mere recollection. It represented a form of resistance, a means to reclaim something that the fences could not diminish. Liesl Hartman moved with more haste, braiding her hair back with sharp tugs. Her lips formed a thin line. She carried herself as if still in military service, chin elevated, posture erect. Yet, her eyes betrayed her underlying agitation. She detested the routine, the neat rows of bunks, the orderly meals, the watchful gazes of the guards. In her mind, every act of kindness was merely a prelude to betrayal. When she overheard the sentries outside exchanging jests in English, she murmured to Anna, "They laugh because they believe we are broken." Anna, smoothing a crease from her skirt, replied quietly, "Or perhaps because they are attempting to disengage from thoughts of war." Outside, Captain Whitaker strode across the yard, his shadow stretching long in the pale dawn. He greeted the guards with a nod, inspected their formations, then stood at the forefront as assignments were announced. His voice was calm, deliberate, never raised. He believed order alone was sufficient to command respect. To him, cruelty was a symptom of deficiency, a facile expedient. Nevertheless, he kept his sidearm polished, his vigilance sharp, for mercy devoid of watchfulness was akin to an unsecured entryway. The women were dispersed to various duties. Some were assigned to the laundry, scrubbing American uniforms until their fingers puckered from the cold water. Others mended torn garments or peeled endless baskets of potatoes. Liesl found herself designated for the infirmary, her medical background acknowledged. She sterilized instruments, applied bandages to minor injuries, and observed as American guards presented themselves for treatment. The irony pricked at her. She had once tended to German soldiers with a sense of pride, yet here she stood, wiping blood from her adversary's knuckles. Still, her hands moved with practiced efficiency, refusing to betray the turmoil of her thoughts. Anna's contingent was directed to the sewing room, where bolts of coarse fabric were stacked in orderly piles. The hum of the sewing machines was constant, a droning testament to the passage of time. She discovered a peculiar solace in the repetition, her hands engaged while her mind wandered. On one occasion, while adjusting the thread, she hummed a German lullaby under her breath. To her surprise, one of the guards stationed outside the door tapped along with the rhythm, then softly whistled back a melody of his own, an American hymn she did not recognize. Their musical phrases intertwined, foreign yet remarkably consonant, before each returned to silence. By midday, the sun bore down heavily, and the camp settled into a more subdued rhythm. In the mess hall, the women sat at long wooden tables, bowls steaming with beans, cornbread arranged beside them. Coca-Cola bottles clinked against tin cups, the dark effervescence a source of persistent curiosity. Some sipped tentatively, while others drank with concealed delight. Liesl invariably consumed hers rapidly, as if to purge herself of any evidence. Anna, meanwhile, studied the bubbles, later making notes in her journal. The beverage tastes of mirth, a weapon in its own right, perhaps the kind that disarms without resorting to firearms. Private Bobby Malone, leaning casually by the doorway, observed with a grin, "Never imagined I'd witness the day Germans fussed over cornbread like it's gold," he drawled to another guard. His voice carried, and one of the women murmured in German, "They believe we are children." Anna translated softly, adding, "Perhaps they see us as human instead." Liesl shook her head, unwilling to concede. The afternoons extended long. The women toiled in the fields adjacent to the barracks, harvesting wheat under armed supervision. The vista of golden acreage stretching towards the horizon was poignant with irony. Home possessed a similar golden hue, an equal fertility, but was irrevocably out of reach. Liesl paused once, her gaze fixed on the unending expanse, and whispered, "Freedom appears identical across all landscapes. The distinction lies solely in who possesses the keys." The Americans, for their part, maintained a peculiar blend of formality and lightheartedness. Some maintained their distance, their expressions impassive. Others exchanged words, attempted rudimentary German, or ventured clumsy jests. Bobby belonged to the latter group. Once, when a ball rolled across the yard from the guard's baseball game, he tossed it towards the women and mimed a swing. Curious glances met him. Finally, one of the auxiliaries took the bat he offered and swung with all her might in a backward motion, narrowly missing his head. The yard erupted in startled laughter. Even Liesl managed a reluctant smile before her face hardened once more. Whitaker observed these minor interactions with a degree of caution. He permitted music to be played in the evenings. Glenn Miller's melodies drifted across the compound, horns weaving through the twilight. It uplifted spirits, but he understood that excessive familiarity risked undermining discipline. One evening, his officers questioned him over cigars. "You are coddling them," one remarked. Whitaker responded calmly, "Better coddled than savage. Treat individuals like beasts, and they will become beasts. Treat them with humanity, and they will offer you order." His pronouncements quelled debate, although a sense of disquiet persisted. Not all was tranquil. Rumors circulated through the camp like shadows. News of Allied triumphs, of German retreats, filtered in through radios and hushed conversations. Each cheer from beyond the fence served as another reminder of what had been forfeited. Some women wept silently at night, muffling their sobs in thin blankets. Others prayed, clinging to past allegiances, whispering pleas for Hitler's deliverance. Liesl clenched her fists beneath the covers, torn between resentment and the encroaching weight of uncertainty. One evening, Anna confided quietly as they sat by the fence's edge during a rest period. "I believe," she said, gazing at the golden fields, "that kindness is more unsettling than cruelty. Cruelty is comprehensible. You resist it, you endure, but kindness—" Her voice trailed off, her pencil scratching faintly in her journal. Kindness makes you question what else might have been a fabrication." Liesl turned abruptly. "Do not permit them to deceive you. They provide us nourishment now, but they will consign us to ruins." Anna closed her book. "And ruins are not softened by bitterness. At least we can retain the memory of this." The fences themselves became a paradox. Barriers that confined, yet also protected. Beyond them, warfare continued its destructive course. Within them, life followed a rhythm unexpectedly gentler than anticipated. At night, the women listened to the distant whistle of trains, the lowing of cattle, the soft murmurs of the guards. At times, in the quietude preceding dawn, they could almost forget their status as captives. Yet, the reminder invariably resurfaced: the click of a rifle, the silhouette of a watchtower, the barbed wire gleaming silver under the moon's glow. Every gesture of benevolence was underscored by steel. Every moment of levity was shadowed by the knowledge of its potential revocation. As summer progressed, the women began to undergo subtle yet undeniable transformations. Liesl, once rigid with suspicion, found herself humming absent-mindedly while scrubbing floors. Anna, whose journal had commenced as a record of events, now filled its pages with contemplation, comparisons, even glimmers of hope. The guards, too, exhibited a softening. Bobby once surreptitiously procured a peach from the officers' mess, sliding it across the bench towards Liesl. She regarded it, her lips pressed tight, before finally biting into the fruit. Juice trickled down her chin, and Bobby, chuckling, offered her a handkerchief. For a fleeting instant, they were merely two young individuals sharing the sweetness of summer. Yet, the sweetness never lingered without a counterpoint of bitterness. That night, Liesl lay awake, replaying the taste of the peach and resenting herself for relishing it. She whispered into the darkness, "They are the enemy. Remember that." Nevertheless, her heart betrayed her, clinging to the recollection of sunlight, laughter, and the tender flesh of the peach. Anna, sensing the shift in her friend, wrote by candlelight, "Perhaps captivity is not the iron fetter we envisioned, but rather a looking glass. What we perceive depends not on the guardians, but on ourselves." Whitaker, reviewing reports in his office, paused over the daily sustenance manifest. It struck him with a quiet irony. The prisoners consumed 3,000 calories per day, often exceeding what families outside the wire could afford with ration stamps. He pondered what would transpire when these women returned to a Germany that was impoverished and shattered. Would they recount tales of Coca-Cola and peaches, or would they suppress them from a sense of shame? He took another sip of bourbon, the burden of conflicting realities pressing upon him. The cicadas sang more loudly that night, their droning chorus ascending as the sky bruised into twilight. The women lay in their bunks, each ensnared in private tempests of memory, guilt, and grudging gratitude. The fences gleamed silver in the moonlight, unyielding yet strangely protective, containing them within a world that was not freedom, but also not the nightmare they had dreaded. And as Anna closed her journal with a sigh, she felt the faintest tremor of apprehension, for kindness, she realized, could not persist indefinitely. And when it ceased, its absence might inflict a wound more profound than cruelty ever could. The initial photographic evidence arrived tucked within newspapers, smuggled past the gates, the ink still carrying the scent of fresh print. They depicted skeletal figures behind wire mesh, their eyes hollow, their limbs like twigs draped in striped fabric. The women within the Kansas facility stared at the images in stunned silence. For several days, they had subscribed to the American narratives as mere embellishments, propaganda designed to sway their loyalties. But here, within the stark, grainy monochrome, the truth confronted them. Concentration camps, mountainous heaps of corpses, smoke ascending from chimneys unrelated to industrial activity. Anna Vogel traced one photograph with her fingertip, her throat constricting. She had instructed her pupils back in Bavaria regarding loyalty, sacrifice, the fatherland. Now she felt her lessons dissolving into ash. If this is what Germany has wrought, she whispered to herself, then perhaps we deserve to be prisoners. She closed her journal without making any entries. Words, for once, failed her. Liesl Hartmann reacted with a fury that concealed her fear. "Fabrications," she spat, even as her voice faltered. "They endeavor to persuade us that our nation is monstrous, so we will forget our identity." Yet, that night, she lay awake, the visages from the photographs replaying in her mind. She pressed her palms over her eyes, willing them to recede, but they remained. The benevolence experienced in Kansas tasted of treachery when juxtaposed with the horror back home. The guards, too, grappled with this dissonance. Private Bobby Malone studied the images for longer than he would admit, his youthful smile faltering. His brother was engaged in combat in Italy. The thought of him trudging through mud while Bobby stood here guarding women who imbibed Coca-Cola troubled him. He penned a letter home. "Sometimes I believe these prisoners consume more substantial meals than I do. But when I observe what the newspapers report about Germany, I wonder if keeping them well-nourished is not the most fitting retribution of all." Captain Whitaker navigated the rising tension with his characteristic restraint. He convened the guards one evening, the photographs spread across his desk. "Remember your directives," he stated. "These prisoners are not the architects of those camps. They are pieces caught within a mechanism they did not construct. Treat them as individuals, not as embodiments of their nation's transgressions. We extend them gracious treatment, not from any merit on their part, but from a moral imperative to transcend the cruelty of their past world." His tone was measured, yet his fingers tightened, creasing the documentation. Daily routines persisted, but an unspoken transformation had begun. The women toiled in the fields with a more deliberate pace, their conversations subdued. Evening melodies carried a somber undertone, the triumphant notes of Glenn Miller now tinged with melancholy. Anna resumed her practice of jotting down observations, noting the vast expanse of the heavens and the way the wheat stalks bowed in the breeze like supplicants. Her written thoughts displayed less defiance and more introspection, as if the very boundaries of their confinement had become instructors. Liesl, fiercely resistant, accepted another peach from Bobby on a sweltering afternoon, only to fling the stone into the earth with exaggerated force. "I refuse to be subdued by fruit," she declared, though the fruit's sweetness lingered on her palate. Bobby chuckled uneasily, sensing an inner turmoil beneath her words. "As you wish," he responded, but he retained a vivid impression of her gaze. Her eyes conveyed not just animosity, but a complex blend of yearning and sorrow. Cultural exchanges gradually permeated their existence, like persistent vines finding purchase in crevices. The women skillfully embroidered linens with German designs, earning admiration from their American visitors. In turn, their custodians imparted fragments of English, such as "thank you" and "good morning." The phrase Coca-Cola evolved into a universal idiom, requiring no translation. The initial instance of one of the auxiliary women attempting swing dancing under the watchful amusement of the soldiers elicited ripples of laughter across the compound. Even Liesl found herself succumbing to a fleeting smile, quickly suppressing it. However, this levity was precarious, as it threatened to soften the hardened resolve some wished to maintain. Whispers circulated regarding dissent within the American ranks concerning this magnanimous approach. A communication to the War Department voiced this displeasure. You are squandering precious sugar on adversaries while our own citizens endure rationing. Captain Whitaker incinerated such correspondence in his office furnace, observing the ashes disintegrate. He firmly believed in the efficacy of the policy. Nourish them, house them, let them witness the essence of America. He envisioned them returning across the Atlantic, carrying narratives that might sow seeds of peace more potent than any explosive. One evening, as the women rested near the perimeter during their designated break, Anna confided in Liesel, "I believe compassion has disarmed me more profoundly than any brutality ever could. It compels me to question our own identity when those we deem enemies treat us with greater consideration than our own leaders." Her voice trembled as she spoke, like a confession. Liesel averted her gaze abruptly. "Do not utter such things. You betray everything." Yet, her own convictions faltered. She recalled tending to a wounded soldier in a field hospital, a mere boy of 18 who whispered "Danke" before succumbing. If her nation had constructed facilities akin to what she had witnessed, for what had he perished? This internal conflict permeated her dreams. Anna awoke one night, weeping softly, clutching her diary. She penned by candlelight. "When Whitaker's young daughter offered me a biscuit through the fence today, I felt a burden of shame heavier than any shackles. How does one partake in a child's generosity when one's own people are starving?" She extinguished the candle and lay trembling, the phantom sweetness of sugar an unbearable sensation. The guards, too, grappled with conflicting emotions. Bobby confided in a fellow soldier, "It doesn't feel right to feel sorry for them. My own brother is bleeding out somewhere, and I'm ensuring these girls get ice cream." His companion shrugged. "Perhaps that's the objective. We fight there so we don't have to fight here." But Bobby remained unsettled. The war was supposed to be unambiguous, noble individuals against malevolent forces. Yet here, confined behind the wire, the distinctions blurred. Whitaker experienced this most acutely. He found himself observing the women during meals, noting their tentative smiles at small comforts. He recalled his daughter's poignant question, "Do the enemy ladies cry at night?" He now understood the answer. He saw it reflected in their eyes each morning, rimmed with redness but resolute. And although he repeatedly reminded himself that he was overseeing prisoners, a part of him acknowledged the simple truth. They were fellow human beings striving to endure. Autumnal winds swept across the plains, rattling the barbed wire and scattering leaves across the grounds. The golden fields faded to a muted brown as daylight hours diminished. With the changing season came renewed speculation. The European conflict might soon conclude. The women spoke in hushed tones of home, of its potential existence. Some held on to the hope of reunification, while others dreaded returning to desolation. Anna recorded in her journal, "We are held in a peculiar state of grace. Within these confines, life holds together. Beyond them, only destruction awaits." The palpable tension reached a quiet zenith one afternoon when Liesel succumbed to exhaustion in the infirmary. Bobby, stationed nearby, rushed in without hesitation, assisting her to her feet. She recoiled sharply. "I do not require your sympathy." Yet her legs wavered and she leaned against the wall, gasping for breath. Bobby stood awkwardly, his hands partially extended. "It's not pity," he murmured softly, "just being human." The words struck her more forcefully than any physical blow. She turned away, fighting back tears, resentful of the kindness she could not entirely reject. That night, she confessed to Anna in a whisper, "I no longer recognize myself. If malevolence defines our enemies, then what does compassion render us?" Anna placed her diary in Liesel's hands. "It renders us alive, and that is sufficient for now." Liesel returned the book, but not before her eyes fell upon a resonant phrase. "We prevail in conflicts not solely through armaments, but through sustenance." She lay awake, repeating these words until slumber, finally, claimed her. The camp seemed to fall into a deeper quietude afterward, as if all within sensed the encroaching shadow of the war. The women continued their routines, partaking in meals and occasional laughter, but each moment was underscored by a pervasive unease. The photographs had sown seeds of doubt that grew with each passing day, sowing confusion about allegiances and reshaping self-perceptions. Even Whitaker, usually steadfast, felt its influence. He noted in his private reflections, "We believe boundaries protect us, but they also expose our character. Generosity is a formidable weapon. it penetrates more deeply than projectiles. One evening, as the women congregated in the fading light, Anna observed something unusual. In the distant fields beyond the fence, a train whistle sounded, a long, mournful cry that seemed to emanate from another realm. The women turned their heads in unison, their faces ashen. Lysel clutched the wire, her eyes wide with alarm. That whistle was not a promise of return, but a stark reminder of waiting transport ships, of forced displacement, of an uncertain future hurtling toward them. The guards directed them back inside, but the sound lingered, vibrating through the atmosphere long after the train had receded. In that instant, the women grasped what the camp's leniency had obscured. The barriers would not confine them indefinitely. Beyond lay a world shattered, poised to test them in ways no ice cream or Coca-Cola could mitigate. Anna closed her diary with trembling hands. The final entry before the lights extinguished bore a weight she could not articulate. Sweetness is ephemeral, and its absence can inflict deeper wounds than cruelty ever did. The winter of 1946 brought an unusual tranquility. Snow lightly dusted the barracks, softening the camp's harsh angles and muffling the sounds of footsteps and the humming of barbed wire. Within the structures, the German women exchanged hushed rumors too persistent to dismiss. The war had concluded, Germany lay devastated and divided. Yet, they remained in Kansas, suspended between confinement and freedom. News finally permeated the camp like a tremor. Repatriation orders had arrived. Anna Vogel closed her diary and held it to her chest, as if the slender volume could steady her against the impending storm. She had anticipated this moment for months, yet the prospect of venturing beyond the fences now filled her with apprehension. The barracks, despite their austere walls and narrow beds, had become an unexpected sanctuary. Beyond lay devastation, scarcity, and faces etched with defeat. Here, at least, there was sustenance, warmth, and the peculiar benevolence of their captors. Liesl Hartmann, conversely, reacted with spirited defiance to the announcement. For her, the camp had always represented an opulent prison, and even gilded cages remained prisons. Gazing at the snow outside the window, she declared with conviction, "Rubble is preferable to confinement. At least rubble belongs to us." However, her voice faltered as she added, "If it still exists." Captain James Whittaker delivered the directives with his characteristic composure, though an underlying gravity underscored his words. "You will be transported home shortly," he informed the assembled women. "The process will extend over several weeks, perhaps months. Departures will occur in designated groups. Until then, life continues as it has." His tone remained impassive, but afterward he lingered by the window, observing their measured dispersal, as if he too contemplated whether liberation constituted kindness or cruelty. Private Bobby Malone's reaction was one of unvarnished sincerity. "Well, blast it," he muttered to a comrade. "I'll miss all of them, even the sharp-tongued one." He refrained from naming Liesl, but a flush on his cheeks betrayed him. He had witnessed her defenses gradually erode, never fully, but enough to perceive the tempest within. The thought of her vanishing across the ocean into a landscape of ruins unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Life within the camp adopted a bittersweet rhythm. Every familiar element, the morning bell, the clatter of trays in the mess hall, the low hum of evening music, now carried a sense of finality. Anna wrote with fervent intensity in her diary, meticulously recording every detail, from the crunch of snow underfoot to the glint of ice on the wire. She feared forgetting, feared that in Germany, her experiences would be met with disbelief. One afternoon, Whittaker's young daughter visited the camp again, bundled in warm clothing, her cheeks flushed from the cold. She approached Liesl through the fence, clutching a small bottle of Coca-Cola in her mittened hands. "For you," the child said softly, her English words hesitant but clear. Liesl knelt, her eyes stinging, and accepted the bottle with trembling fingers. She whispered in German, "For home," though the word now felt hollow. The girl smiled and returned to her father, leaving Liesl gazing at the glass bottle as if it were a sacred artifact. Farewells commenced quietly, almost sheepishly. A contingent of women departed in January, loaded into trucks that rolled away across the frozen plains. Tears were shed on both sides of the barrier. The remaining internees pressed close to the wire, watching the convoy vanish, their breath forming ghostly plumes in the frigid air. The subsequent void was palpable, the barracks emptier, the grounds more silent. As weeks elapsed, departures continued, each farewell chipped away at the illusion that the camp might endure indefinitely. Anna found herself cherishing Bobby's awkward jests, Whitaker's steady demeanor, and even the harsh Kansas winds. She dreaded what awaited in Germany: scarcity, suspicion, narratives dismissed as fanciful. "They will never believe me," she confided to Liesel one night. "They will accuse me of fabricating it all. Coca-Cola, ice cream, kindness. It will sound like madness." Liesel, lying rigidly on her bunk, whispered back, "Then perhaps madness offers greater safety than truth." By March, Anna's name appeared on the repatriation roster. She experienced a peculiar blend of apprehension and relief. On her final morning at the camp, she stood near the fence, diary pressed to her chest, and watched the sky blush pink with the dawn. Bobby approached, shuffling his boots in the snow. "Safe journeys, ma'am," he said, his voice softer than usual. Then, after a pause, he added, "Write it all down so folks don't forget." Anna nodded, suppressing tears. "I already have." Her departure left Liesel bereft. She had relied on Anna's steady wisdom, her ability to temper harsh realities with thoughtful reflection. Now, she faced the final weeks alone, clinging to her brittle shield of defiance. Yet, when her name was finally called in April, she felt not triumph, but dread. She had longed for release. Now, the thought of leaving the camp's peculiar leniency filled her with terror. The farewell was abrupt, almost violent in its contained emotion. She walked toward the trucks, her satchel light, her boots heavy. Whitaker stood nearby, hands clasped behind his back, his expression unreadable. As she passed him, she forced herself to meet his gaze. He offered a single nod, a soldier's parting gesture, but she perceived in his eyes an unspoken sentiment. Regret, perhaps even a measure of respect. Bobby, standing further away, tipped his cap awkwardly. "Take care, Liesel," he called out. Her name on his lips startled her more than any official decree ever had. She turned her head, offered the faintest of nods, and then ascended into the truck without looking back. The convoy rumbled away, leaving the camp behind. The snow melted as the days lengthened, and by the time Liesel's vessel docked in Germany, spring had begun to emerge. Yet, the land to which she returned bore little resemblance to the country she had departed. Cities lay in ruins, streets choked with debris, hunger etched onto every face. Home had become a charnel house. Neighbors met her narratives with skepticism, at times with outright hostility. When she spoke of Coca-Cola and ice cream, they scoffed. "Lies. Americans starved us," one woman spat. "And you dare speak of sweetness?" Liesel fell silent, swallowing the truth as if it were a stone. In that silence, shame thrived. It seemed to foster forgetfulness. Anna fared little better. When she shared passages from her diary, her family accused her of being weakened, corrupted by the enemy. "You dishonor the dead," her brother snarled. She closed the book, concealed it within a drawer, and never again read from it. Yet, in the quiet of the night, she whispered the words to herself, clinging to them as a lifeline. Years elapsed. The camp receded into collective memory, a story recounted in fragmented pieces, often dismissed, but not all traces vanished. Anna, now elderly, sat with her granddaughter on a summer evening, the air thick with the aroma of baking bread. She opened a carton of ice cream, a commonplace purchase, and watched the child's pure delight as it melted down her chin. Anna smiled softly, tasting the sweetness herself, and whispered, "A prison may have barriers, but kindness possesses wings." The child laughed, uncomprehending, but the words hung in the air like a benediction. Liesel, too, carried the recollection, though she seldom spoke of it. In her advanced years, she kept a singular memento on her shelf, an empty Coca-Cola bottle, its glass scarred but intact. Visitors perceived it as a mere trinket, devoid of significance. She never corrected them. At night, she would touch the bottle and recall the moment a child had pressed it into her hands and how it had carried more weight than any chains. Whitaker never publicly discussed the camp. He retired quietly, his military records filed away, his service acknowledged but not lauded. Yet, he carried the images of those women with him always, their initial suspicion, their gradual softening, the tears shed at their departure. He believed, though he never voiced it aloud, that he had waged his most significant campaign not with ordnance, but with nourishment, melody, and compassion. Bobby, of course, recounted tales in his own manner. Around kitchen tables and bar counters, he would jest about German women attempting baseball, about one who nearly felled him with a wild swing. But he never spoke of the peach, nor of the profound sorrow he had glimpsed in Liesel's eyes on that final morning. Some memories, he understood, were too delicate to share. The narrative of the camp did not make front-page news, nor did it shape treaties or monuments. It resided quietly, preserved in journals, in bottles, in the taste of sugar on tongues that had once anticipated only hardship. Its impact lay not in its magnitude, but in its symbolism, that even amidst conflict, humanity could manifest in the most unexpected places, fragile, yet real, like ice cream on a sweltering day, in a place designated for punishment. The concluding chapter of that saga is not etched in official decrees or archives, but within memory, in the lingering sweetness long after it has dissolved. The barriers had crumbled, the barbed wire rusting in forgotten fields. Yet the compassion extended within them journeyed far beyond any convoy. It lived on in hushed conversations, in diaries secreted away in drawers, in bottles left untouched on shelves, in grandchildren savoring ice cream on summer evenings, unaware of the tears that accompanied its sweetness. And though the women had returned to a landscape of ruins, though their accounts were met with disbelief and their memories derided, the truth remained unbroken, like glass that has endured fire. In the crucible of steel and flame, they had discovered something more potent than either. Mercy, unanticipated and undeserved, had become an intrinsic part of them. Liesel, in her final years, confessed it only once to a nurse who inquired about the bottle on her shelf. Her voice wavered, but her gaze was steady. "That," she stated, "is what kindness tastes like, and kindness endures beyond war." The words resonated in the hushed room, as profound as any victory, as delicate as any recollection, and as lasting as the sweetness that had once melted on her, tongue in a Kansas prison camp.